just talk a little bit, if you will, on kind of the types of stunning. I know in cattle we use captive bolt, um, and on hogs we try to do electrical stunning, and if we can do like the CO2 or the chemical stunning. Would you please tell us, and just as an overview, talk a little bit about those, and then we can start more in depth about your project.
Yeah, sure. So there are three primary categories of stunning that we acknowledge. So we have chemical, physical, and electrical. The chemical method, like you mentioned, is typically carbon dioxide gas. And for the most part, in red meat species, we see that used on pigs. In poultry, though, we see it used quite a bit for chickens and turkeys. We also will see physical stunning used. And the thing about physical stunning, that's going to include captive bolt or gunshot. We also refer to it as mechanical stunning. So that type of stunning method can be applied to any species. That's kind of the nice thing about using that method. It's quick, it's effective. One of the big issues that we run into with it, though, is that in some species, there's a considerable amount of post-stun involuntary carcass movement that makes it really hard for shackling. That's one of the main reasons why, for a lot of small and very small processors that use captive bolt guns, we'll often try to transition them off of using captive bolt onto using electrical stunning if they have effective restraint available, just because it's so hard to get those pigs shackled. And there's also a fair amount of petechial hemorrhaging that'll happen as well, just from all of the change in blood pressure that happens with the very rapid and massive amount of muscle contraction that happens after a captive bolt stun on a pig. And then the third category is electrical stunning, and that one's pretty straightforward. So in that case, we're going to apply an electrical current to the body of the animal. It has to include the brain in the circuit. So this can either be done with a single step where we're going to pass a current just across the brain. In that case, we're going to usually have a window of about 15 seconds that we have to have the animal hoisted and stuck. So bleeding has to start, or there's a good chance the animal's going to return to consciousness. We can also include part of the spinal column in that circuit too. And that's what you see in a lot of larger plants that do electrical stunning. So they usually have an electrode that's near the head and another electrode that's located further back on the body. And with that type of stunning system, the thought is that it's going to knock out the brain, but then also depolarize that section of the spine that's included in the circuit. And that also helps then to make it so that the heart doesn't function as it normally would. So it goes into this state of fibrillation where it's just beating so erratically and irregularly that you can't pump blood consistently through the body. The other process, or the other approach that we can take with electrical stunning, is we can do a two-step process. So we can apply electrical current across the head, roll the animal out of a restrainer if we need to, or let the animal collapse depending on how we're stunning, and then apply a current to the cardiac region, so at the heart, to knock out the heart too. So that gives you a little bit of a description of some of the stunning that we use.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you brought up a very good point in terms of uh, if that facility has the ability to have very that restraint in place. You mentioned for that electrical stunning, when you go from back on the head to all the way to the right on the back further back in the body. We do a lot of maybe 4 or 5 times a semester here at K State when we slaughter pigs, and that's a method that we utilize here. And you mentioned that because not a lot of people have that ability to have that in place in terms of not, I mean, that the pig cannot move to get that very efficiently applied, that electricity going through that. So I think that's a pretty good point. And I think some of the challenges, right? And you mentioned the captive bolt. It's efficient, but you have that involuntary movement, but that doesn't mean the animal is conscious. It's just right that
Mm-hmm.
but that sometimes freaks people out because hey, is that really, I mean, that is not kicking a lot, is that really stun, or what do you do? So do you have any thoughts on that, like that kicking? I mean, what type of, I don't know, recommendations real quick for folks that are having that issue, that they're right doing it right, but they see a lot of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that one's really tough. So if in the case of cattle, we can usually manage it pretty well because you have kind of a window where there's not a lot of movement after the stun. And as long as you're working within that period of time, you can get a shackle on and you can get hoisting pretty quickly. But in the case of pigs, it's usually best to try to use some other type of stunning method if you can. Or you might have to either table stick, which is not necessarily the best route to take because it really takes relearning the motion of exsanguination because it's different if the animal's lying on its side versus hanging upside down, but it's something that can be learned. So that's an option. Another choice is to try to knock out the heart, and then you've got hopefully enough depolarization of the spine that goes along with that stun that you'll have a little longer time to get that shackle on before the animal starts to kick. In general, though, we want to try to avoid using a captive bolt or a gunshot on pigs just because of all that involuntary kicking and the carcass damage that comes along with it. With that said, you have carcass damage with electrical stunning on pigs too, because that's where you're usually going to see breakage of bones and also, yeah, blood splash there as well. So, there's no real silver bullet there. Another thing we've got to kind of think about here in the future is how the pigs experience carbon dioxide stunning too. So it seems that there is a portion of the population of pigs that respond adversely to exposure to carbon dioxide. And so that's one of those challenges we've got to get our heads wrapped around, I think, pretty soon and try to fix the issue. It seems like that's an issue that might be able to be fixed through genetic selection of pigs that just they don't respond adversely to carbon dioxide, but it's going to take some work to figure it out.
Yeah, and what do you mean by adversely? You mean that the livestock won't get knocked, or what do you mean by that?
So yeah, what I mean is that they'll respond adversely, meaning that they'll become agitated or excited and may display behaviors that look like escape behaviors inside the gondola when they're going into the CO2 system. Mm-hmm.
So I know, generally speaking, when we think about CO2 chambers, we think that the quality is improved overall. I mean, is that an accurate statement? I mean, when you compare electrical stunning versus CO2 stunning or chemical stunning?
Oh yeah, yeah. The color is better in CO2 stun pigs, and you'll see far less blood splash. Blood splash is very uncommon in CO2 systems, and also bone breaks. So you don't see as much of that either. So the movement to CO2 has done a lot for improving meat quality. And the next challenge we have to focus on is making sure that the pigs that we're putting into those systems don't experience discomfort within those systems.